The next speaker is Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim. He has done his MCH plastic surgery from Tanjavur Medical College from 2008 to 2011. He is a consultant in plastic surgery at the SIMS Hospital, Chennai. He has been a clinical fellow at the Ogori Daiichi General Hospital, Yamaguchi in Japan, where he trained with Doi. And his fields of interest are reconstructive microsurgery in the extremity and hand trauma, microlymphatic surgery for lymphedema, hand surgery, brachial plexus surgery, general plastic surgery, and burn surgery. And the moderator for this session will be Dr. Hari Venkatramani, a senior consultant plastic surgeon from Ganga Hospitals, Coimbatore. Over to you, Dr. Hari.
Thank you, Dr. Karthikeyan. It's a great pleasure to be in this session. And as Sir said, plastic surgeons are always associated with aesthetic surgery. I think one another field where nobody else wants to come in or nobody wants to touch is lymphedema. And that's another field as plastic surgeons. We were doing it, and Dr. Ibrahim is from Tanjavur, and all of us know Dr. Jamal's work. Incidentally, one patient came to us last week in our clinic, and she was talking 10 minutes non-stop about Dr. Jamal. It was so nice to hear about him. So I think lymphedema is one area where we should really sort of get in. And again, it's a multidisciplinary approach, and there are a lot of nuances which you need to get into place. Something like if you want to be an aesthetic surgeon, you need to be both clinically as well as the logistic part, you need to be good. And the same thing applies for lymphedema. So I think first we'll have the talk, and once Dr. Ibrahim speaks, then we will take up some questions and have the discussion. Over to Dr. Ibrahim.
So thank you, sir. I'll share my screen, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, good evening, respected chairperson and all the attendees of the meeting. I thank Professor Karthikeyan for giving me this opportunity. Today, I'll be talking about lymphedema, the current concepts, our understanding, and our experience in treating patients with lymphedema. Lymphedema is accumulation of protein-rich interstitial fluid within the skin and subcutaneous tissue that occurs as a result of lymphatic dysfunction. The case load is enormous. There are supposed to exist around 140 to 200 million cases exist worldwide. And as Hari said, not many people take up lymphedema. In fact, as appealing as aesthetic surgery is to the young plastic surgeon, probably lymphedema is on the other extreme of some of the most unappealing cases for a young surgeon to deal with. One, because of the chronicity of the problem, and because of the intractable nature of the disease, in which there is no clear-cut options available. There is no surgery, there is no treatment that gives a definitive cure to the patient right away. So I'll just briefly run through the basics. Primary etiology of lymphedema classified as primary and secondary. Primary are patients who have a genetic predisposition. Women are more prone, and it usually develops around the menarche, and there are varying times at which it can occur. Left leg is involved more, I don't know why, and upper extremity is rarely involved. So secondary lymphedema, this is some of the commonest of all cases. India being a large number of patients being in India, especially due to the infestation with the Wuchereria bancrofti and other parasitic worms. And coming to the next major upcoming, I would say rather major causes for lymphedema being damage due to removal of regional lymph nodes by surgery, radiation, tumor invasion. In fact, 25% of patients following breast cancer surgery is supposed to develop lymphedema over their lifetime. Some of these patients, they don't develop lymphedema immediately, but at some point of time, they will develop. So initially, it's a clinical diagnosis. Swelling begins generally, distally, and progresses proximally, indolent in nature. Initially soft and pits easily, but it gradually becomes non-pitting. And then skin changes start appearing, and it becomes progressive pigmentation, lichenification, dermatosclerosis, lymphangiectasis, fissuring, eczematization, leading to the classical elephantiasis that we see. Usually when advanced lymphedema patient walks in, the whole OP knows that this patient is here because he is lymphoric, he's stinking, and there is a malodor that comes with the patient. The patient attenders are very hesitant to talk about the problem. The patient himself is ashamed of it. So these are the kind of patients who are ostracized at home, ostracized at almost everywhere they go. So a change in condition in these, an improvement over this brings a huge change in lifestyle for these patients. In terms of imaging, lymphoscintigraphy is the accepted gold standard for diagnosis of lymphedema. I don't use this often, but there are some patients who come early who demand a definitive objective diagnosis of lymphedema. These are patients with mild lymphedema, unilateral lymphedema, with pitting edema, reversible edema, either ISL stage 0 or stage 1. These patients, they are not ready to accept that they have a lymphedema. They demand a diagnosis. So those patients, I always get a lymphoscintigraphy done. It shows tracer uptake. It shows quantitative. It measures the tracer flow along the lymphatic system. It also demonstrates the lymphatic system to some extent, whether there is a lymphatic system, lymphatics present, hyperplastic or hypoplastic. So this is the information that is available in a lymphoscintigraphy. Now, I use ICG lymphangiography more. We have we don't have a isolated infrared camera, but we have a microscope that has an integrated near infrared camera. So we do it as an OP procedure. So we inject indocyanine green. Excuse me. Yeah. We use indocyanine green. And in the web spaces, and using the near infrared camera, the lymphatics can be accessed. In fact, the lymphatics can be seen in early patients who have a linear pattern of ICG lymphangiography. The lymphatics can be seen. The lymphatics can be visualized. The flow can be assessed, retrograde or prograde. And the type of pattern, whether it's a linear pattern or as the edema is more advanced, whether it's a splash pattern or stardust pattern, is usually identifiable. Then we also mark these lymphatics using a permanent marker, and based on the groupings of these lymphatics, we can mark the skin incision. So I'll talk about the lymphovenous anastomosis in the later part of the talk. We have started doing it, we've done one case. So this is the future. We feel that in early patients, LVA will play a big role. So this is how we plan for an LVA in these patients using an ICG camera. So ISL classification, as I said, we arrive at this ISL classification after diagnosis. We stage it as stage 0, stage 1, stage 2, or stage 3. Stage 0 is a subclinical phase. Usually edema is not seen, but it is demonstrable only by lymphoscintigraphy. Stage 1 is reversible edema. Stage 2 is irreversible edema. Stage 3 is patients with skin changes. Coming to the medical management, the surgical management apart, medical management plays a very big role in these patients because these are long-term patients. They don't have a cure factor in it. So once a diabetic, always a diabetic, and it goes the same for lymphedema also. So once a lymphedema patient, always a lymphedema patient. So we emphasize on basic skincare, prevention of fungal infections in the web spaces, and prevention of secondary infection. We feel secondary infection plays a huge role in progression of lymphedema. Repeated secondary infection causes repeated fibrosis of the lymphatics, which leads to further progression of the disease. So we treat the secondary infection by usually gram-positive antimicrobial cover, bed rest, leg elevation. Recurrent lymphangitis occur in up to 15 to 25% of these lymphedema patients, irrespective of the cause. And long-term antibiotic prophylaxis with penicillin prophylaxis. I was trained in Tanjavur, where we use Penidur prophylaxis every 21 days. But in my practice in Chennai, people don't agree for an injection every 21 days. So I give them long-term antibiotic prophylaxis with Penidur, oral penicillin, given every month for 5 days. And other anti-edema measures like coumarin derivatives and flavonoids, there are a lot of reports that say it helps, but there are no randomized controlled trials that are available that prove efficacy. I don't use them personally. So complex decongestive therapy. I feel complex decongestive therapy is the cornerstone in management of these lymphedema patients. It involves leg elevation, manual lymphatic drainage, Manual lymphatic drainage is a kind of a specialized gentle massage in which a trained lymphedema therapist manipulates the limb to move the accumulated lymph fluid from the distal part into the proximal areas. So it is done in a set pattern. There are lymphosomes. So the areas of proximal lymphosomes, for let us say for an upper limb lymphedema, the proximal lymphosome are the axilla, the neck, the thoracic region. They are massaged first to empty the proximal lymphosomes, and then distal massage is done to push the lymph fluid into the empty lymphosomes. So once an MLD is done, then we do compression bandaging using short stretch compression bandages. We use a multi-layer compression bandaging technique with moderate to moderate compression. So we try to achieve at least class 2 levels of compression. So this is advised for the patient to do on a daily basis. So in abroad, everywhere we have certified MLD therapists who does it at the clinical center or at home. But in India, there is a huge shortage of MLD therapists. There is hardly any. All of our MLD therapists are trained by ourselves. And there are very few programs where certified therapists are being trained. So this is a huge vacuum in terms of lymphedema management in the country right now. Then these patients, once the bandaging is done, they are taught lymphatic exercises, which they are asked to do at home. So the nuances of treating lymphedema starts with the CDT because it is so difficult to do it on a regular basis by the patient. Our patients are usually compromised, elderly patients living alone, post-cancer survivors. So it's very difficult for them to come to the hospital daily. So what we suggest is they get admitted in a center for a week where our MLD therapists train a caregiver, a spouse or a son or a daughter who could stay with the patient or who stays with the patient. So that particular caregiver is trained over a period of 7 days. And then the second half of 7 days, usually our MLD therapist observes as the caregiver does the massage and bandaging. So we train them reasonably well. So even then our compliance rate is around 50%. By the end of 1 week, they have excellent supple reduction of lymphedema. But if they don't continue the bandaging and complex decongestive therapy, they go home, they get back almost all the edema back within a few days. So we insist on them to learn and continue this at home. This is probably the most challenging part in the whole treatment spectrum of lymphedema. Coming to surgical management, surgical techniques aim to diminish the size of the affected extremity with resultant improvement in appearance, function, and prevention of infection. So usually surgical procedures are classified as excisional procedures and physiological procedures. So this is Homan's procedure, the classical procedure described for excisional procedure described for lymphedema, used almost universally. In Tanjavur, where I was trained, we also do this procedure. But I feel this is one of our patients who has underwent Homan's procedure. But I feel this doesn't solve in terms of debulking, this doesn't solve all your problems. So what do we do for these patients? So these are very complex, compromised limbs. They have these patients require some kind of debulking procedure because the leg is so unwieldy. No caregiver or no kind of dedicated spouse or a parent or a child can do MLD for this kind of leg at home. So what we do is a radical reduction of lymphedema with preservation of perforators. So with the understanding of the perforator concept in reconstructive surgery, the perforosomes, the understanding has improved over years. So what has done is we try to identify perforators in the crevices. So these kind of lymphedematous limbs where there are multiple lobulated skin swellings, the crevices are areas which are inaccessible, but somehow the quality of skin is much better. Rather than in these areas on the peak of these swellings, the skin is very dermatosclerosis and lichenification is very high. But inside the crevices, the skin is of very good quality and the thickness of the lymphedema is also very less. It is very possible to identify perforators in these zones. So we try to identify perforator, preserve those perforators. There is absolutely no need for us to identify the perforators surgically. Once we mark them preoperatively, these perforators, the areas are located, we try we try not to go near the perforators. We try to preserve at least 2 to 3 centimeter of lymphadematous tissue around the perforators. And based on that, we can make these radical bipedical flaps, parallel incisions with very minimal skin loss, skin necrosis. So for the leg, again, we find that most of the lymphadematous masses are placed posteriorly. So posteriorly placed masses are not served by excision on the medial aspect. So medial aspect excision has a big danger being all the medial perforators from the posterior tibial artery are damaged when you do a medial excision. So we do a posterior excision based on the RRPP principles. The medial and the lateral perforators are preserved. A posterior incision is made with proximal and a distal Y-shaped extensions, and we can do quite a radical debulking procedure. This scar is not visible to the patient, and it is not very visible to any the person standing in front of the patient. Aesthetically, I think these are very well accepted scars given the condition of these legs. And another big advantage is if you want to do a microvascular lymph node transfer at a later date, you don't touch the anterior tibial artery, the anterior tibial veins, and the anterior superficial veins are not disturbed, so that we can do a later staged microvascular procedure. So patients with verrucous lesions, cauliflower-like lesions, patients who come with lymphoria, patients who come with like foul swelling lymphoria and infection, we offer them sculpturing. Using a skin graft blade, we tangentially shave off the involved verrucous lesions, and these wounds are allowed to heal spontaneously, similar to a skin grafting wound in donor site. They usually heal really well. The pigmentation happens when the depth of excision is very deep. This particular patient had a very, very bad leg, hence we had to go certain areas very deep. So this is almost 2 years follow-up, and 2 years follow-up, he still has got pigmentation, but he's got no lymphoria, he's got no repeated ulcerations. So coming to physiological procedures are usually 3. The classical nodovenous shunt described by Professor Jamal, the free lymph node transfers, and lymphaticovenular anastomosis. So I would like to give a nod to Professor Jamal and his team at Tanjavur, where I was fortunate enough to be trained by Professor Devsenan and Professor Joseph Victor. Dr. Jamal was a true visionary in terms of treating lymphedema patients. I was unfortunate that Professor Jamal passed away before I could start my training, but I could meet his wife and get a feel of his practice. And what Dr. Hari said about his patients being devoted to Dr. Jamal is definitely true. Because prior to Dr. Jamal's unit in Tanjavur, people would beg for an amputation of a lymphadematous leg, and he turned it around, in which people would start asking for reconstruction. Then he founded the unit of plastic surgery in Tanjavur based on treatment of patients with lymphedema, I think, which is unique in the world. He demonstrated nodovenous shunt along with Professor Wolszewski. He developed the procedure, and he used it extensively. Now, the prerequisites of this is a functioning lymph node, but there's also long-term duration. It doesn't work for a long-term duration. It works only for a short-term duration, and it's usually used as a staged procedure prior to debulking procedure. So this is a description of nodovenous shunt in a patient. So all this led to further expansion of the physiological procedures, especially in treatment of lymphedema secondary to CA breast. When reconstructing the axilla, when people started transferring groin flaps along with inadvertent lymph nodes, they found that the lymphadematous limb is showing some improvement in terms of edema. So this led to interest in this, and then the technique was developed. It is a well accepted technique being used world over, and it involves vascularized transfer of healthy lymph nodes to lymphadematous limbs. The transfer nodes resume lymphatic function, providing drainage of lymph and protection against infection. I think the second point it plays a very big role in giving a better quality of life for these patients. So how does it work? So gravity helps in pulling off lymph in the dependent areas which are decompressed by the transferred node. The catchment effect, a high pressure arterial inflow and a low pressure large caliber venous outflow creates a suction effect. So this helps in decompressing these limbs. So the presence of endothelial growth factors by the transferred node helps in lymphangiogenesis, and there are intrinsic lymphovenous shunts present inside or in the perinodal tissue that helps in decompressing these limbs. So a lot of donor sites have been described, the groin being the traditional and one of the earliest donor sites, supraclavicular fossa, axilla, submental region, and the gastroepiploic node from the omentum. So there is a talk of donor site lymphatic dysfunction. The main concern is in an already compromised extremity, in a patient having already compromised extremity, we were very anxious about harvesting a lymph node from another extremity drainage site. So this led us to explore submental region as a donor site for lymph nodes. And our protocol involves lymphoscintigraphy, Doppler venous study. We also do an ultrasound of the groin, axilla, and neck to look for visible lymph nodes by ultrasound. So we always find, and there are enough studies to say that submental region always has lymph nodes. Submental region has been used as a donor site for locoregional flaps for head and neck reconstruction, and lymphedema of the head and neck has not been reported due to harvest of a submental flap. So our protocol in these patients, once they get ready for surgery, is manual lymphatic drainage for minimum of 3 weeks, compression bandage. In that 3 weeks, in 1 week, they do it hospitalized immediately prior to surgery. Compression bandage is done very rigorously. Decongestive exercises, leg elevation, and preoperative measurements are made. So we don't use a volumetric method. We use leg circumference measurement at 10 centimeter interval from a bony landmark. So medial malleolus is a bony landmark for our lower extremities, and radial styloid is a bony landmark for our upper extremity. Following which, patients undergo a submental lymph node transfer based on the facial artery and debulking surgery as necessary. So these are the steps involved in harvest of a submental flap. The patient is placed in a supine position with neck in extension. The lower border of the mandible is marked, which is very important because the marginal mandibular nerve lies along the lower border, in fact, inferior to the lower border. So the anterior incision should be made at least 1.5 centimeter posterior to the lower border of the mandible. So the anterior incision is made, the facial artery is identified, and at this point, the marginal mandibular nerve should be identified with the use of a nerve stimulator and preserved. It is imperative that this nerve is identified and preserved because it can cause very visible deformity due to paralysis of the depressor anguli oris muscle. So once the marginal mandibular nerve is identified and preserved, the dissection moves more anteriorly, where the anterior belly of digastric is divided. Once the anterior belly of digastric is divided, we can see the mylohyoid muscle. On the mylohyoid muscle, usually in 70% of patients, runs the submental artery, giving off multiple branches to the mylohyoid muscle. So the submental artery and its branches to the mylohyoid muscle, the terminal submental artery is divided, branches to the mylohyoid is divided, and is traced up to the submandibular gland. So when we do this, the lymph nodes are usually present between the digastric muscle and the platysma. So the lymph nodes are usually preserved. Lymph nodes are not usually disturbed during this dissection. Once we reach the submandibular gland, the branching pattern of the facial artery is studied, identified, and the submandibular lymph nodes are also included in this flap. And then the facial artery is delineated, the proximal distal facial artery is divided, and the flap is harvested. Once the flap is harvested, it's transferred to the to its destined site. We prefer a distal recipient site, ankle for the foot and wrist for the upper limb. And we prefer an end-to-end anastomosis because we always do a CT angiographic study of the vascular system, and if we feel the distal arches are intact, we do an end-to-end anastomosis to the anterior tibial artery and an end-to-end anastomosis to one of the venae comitatus of the anterior tibial vena comitatus. We prefer not to use the great saphenous vein or the superficial veins because due to recurrent lymphangitis, these veins are quite badly scarred and they are not suitable recipient sites for venous anastomosis. So once the transfer is complete, the complex decongestive therapy is restarted on day 10, patient is again taught to do the CDT at home. They are discharged usually after 2 weeks. They are reviewed every month with repeated measurements. And a post-op lymphoscintigraphy is done preferably after 3 months, and any debulking procedure is advised if necessary. So this is our list of patients who have underwent both vascularized lymph node transfer, and we've done 3 patients with vascularized lymph node transfer and 1 patient with vascularized lymph node transfer with LVA. Rest of our patients are compromised patients whom we did debulking procedures alone. So these are some of our patients. This is a patient, a young lady, an international patient with primary lymphedema of the left lower limb, underwent a vascularized lymph node transfer plus RRPP resection on the posterior aspect of the leg. And this is the follow-up at 3 years of follow-up. So these patients, unless and until they do bandaging, compression bandaging and MLD at an extended level, once they go home, they cannot maintain these kind of reductions at home. So the vascularized lymph node does not cause complete decompression of the extremity. Rather, all reported literature shows 80% of the patients have some improvement, with 20% of the patients having no improvement, and some improvement being 15% reduction to 20% reduction. So, but the most significant effect of lymph node transfer, and what we have noticed in our patients, is absence of lymphangitis and cellulitis following the transfer. So this improves the quality of life of the patient to a great extent. So this particular patient used to get admitted at least twice a year, and after lymph node transfer, no hospital admissions due to lymphangitis. This is another patient with a primary lymphedema of the right upper limb, unilateral primary lymphedema of the right upper limb, underwent a submental lymph node transfer, no debulking procedures. So this is a patient in which we have combined vascularized lymph node transfer with an LVA. LVA was performed only for the hand. So we felt that placing the vascularized lymph node in the wrist and the distal third of forearm, we felt that the hand doesn't get decompressed well with this. So we have performed an LVA at the wrist level for this patient. We are able to identify 3 lymphatics, but we could perform only 1 LVA for this patient. But we also done a lymph node transfer. This is an immediate post-op picture. We operated on this patient last week, so I don't have late post-op pictures for her. So outcomes, all our patients had no episodes of lymphangitis after no transfer. The average reduction ranged from 8 to 15%, no lymphoria after the transfer, and subjective improvement in terms of skin texture and severity of edema. Patient always feel, they say that the skin feels softer, the edema feels less tense. It is not easy to demonstrate them objectively, but subjectively all of them feel they would like to, they would recommend or they would undergo the procedure again. So this is one of our patients whom a post-op lymphoscintigraphy was done to study the transferred lymph node. And this can clearly, at a very early lymphoscintigraphy image at 2 hours, we can see that the transferred lymph node in the ankle shows significant tracer uptake after 2 hours. So this shows that the node is functioning and it is taking up lymph, and it also transports lymph along the venous system in more proximally. So why submental lymph node? So it has been used since 1990 as a regional flap for oral cavity defects. No donor site lymphatic dysfunction has been reported in literature. So lymphatic dysfunction is reported after groin, supraclavicular and axillary lymph node harvest, hence not suitable in patients with an already compromised vascular lymphatic system. The possible disadvantages in this flap are marginal mandibular nerve injury and contour abnormalities. But identifying and preserving the marginal mandibular nerve diligently avoids a permanent disability. All our patients, they have transient paresis of the depressor angle levoris, but all of them recovered in the postoperative period. So lymphaticovenous anastomosis is the third physiological procedure that has been described and used quite extensively, especially in the Far East. It involves a supermicrosurgical anastomosis between a venule. So the difference is very important. Professor Kushima, who developed the procedure, and who has proposed it to the world, says doing lymphovenous anastomosis is not enough. We should do it in a small enough vein or a venule so that the pressure on the venous side is less, so that the flow happens across the anastomotic side from the lymphatic side to the venous side. And in fact, Professor Jamal, being the pioneer that he is, he has done a lymphovenous anastomosis in 6 patients and reported it in 1980s. But he has also reported that these are not useful in advanced cases. So the reason for his not so promising results were because he used larger veins to do the anastomosis, and that could have caused backflow. So this technique involves supermicrosurgical technique, which has got a very steep learning curve. And this opens the door for prophylactic lymphatic surgery, because these are very minor procedures, in the sense these are superficial procedures. Multiple stepladder incisions are made, and then the subdermal lymphatics are identified, and the anastomosis are made. So by performing prophylactic surgery in patients who are going to undergo or who are undergoing, let us say, pelvic lymph node dissection for CA cervix, or a patient or a high-risk CA breast patient who is going to undergo radiotherapy plus axillary dissection. So those are the right patients to undergo prophylactic lymphedema surgery. And I think this is the way forward in taking up lymphedema surgery, by preventing lymphedema rather than treating lymphedema. So the future trends, as I said, is prophylactic LVAs, combining vascularized lymph node transfer with LVAs, and something that is, I feel, is very important is standardizing training for lymphedema therapists. I think we should have enough or more multiple centers in which the therapists are trained and therapists are certified, so that they can go all over the country and do this essential medical need, which is completely lacking in the country right now. So that my take-home message is, complex decongestive therapy is the mainstay of treating these patients. So there is no go around this. Without complex decongestive therapy, you cannot treat patients with lymphedema. Vascularized submental lymph node transfer is a valid option for treatment of patients with lymphedema. Submental region is a safe donor site in terms of donor site lymphatic dysfunction. And debulking, especially the perforator sparing technique, is versatile in compromised limbs. So these are compromised limbs which are not suitable for microvascular procedures, but very bad compromised limbs, the therapist will be unable to do MLD. But by giving a better shaped, less lymphotic, less foul smelling, non-ulcerating leg, MLD and complex decongestive therapy can be done in a more effective way. Thank you. And I think nothing would have been possible without my team, my mentors, Dr. Sridhar and Professor Krishnamurthy, and my teachers, Professor Devasenan. And I thank Karthikeyan sir for giving me this opportunity, and the moderators for allowing me to talk. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Ibrahim.
Yes, sir.
It was actually very nice and lucid talk. One comment was, it was a very lucid talk, and it is very nice of Dr. Karthikeyan to having this session. And as he said, star. So I'm sure you are the future star in lymphedema. And so just to start the discussion part, as you said, it is an exact contrast of aesthetic surgery. So there they need clean and neat and everything is fine. Good setup, whereas here, as you said, they are stinking, they are smelly. So here again, you need to have a separate area where they can be washed, they can be cleaned. So starting with, when you start lymphedema, there are three aspects to it, as Dr. Govardhini very nicely said in our lecture. One is, how do you create a clinic, or how do you create a separate center or a separate area? And second is, how do you get yourself trained? And then third is, how do you train the people? Because as you said, the team is big, and there are less MLD specialists all around India. So the one thing where, for all people who want to take up this surgery, there are very few actually technical sort of procedures. Either you have liposuction, debulking, LVA, and lymph node transfer. So basically, there are, if you see surgery wise, Just like in any other major reconstruction, even brachial plexus, you see there are only 4 or 5 major surgeries. But then these patients are, they are a very complex sort of entity in themselves. And we once calculated roughly, each patient needs roughly around 10 specialists to be seen, or 10 specialties who are involved. Starting with plastic surgery as a team leader, we need podiatrists, we need compression, we need physio, we need dietitian for nutrition, because most of them, though they are very obese and they are very fat, they are hypoproteinemic, and they are not healthy. So you need nutrition, and you need to have a high protein diet and salt restricted diet. So that is the next part. And then many of them will need bariatric surgery, and very close coordination with bariatrics is also very important. And coming to MLD, which you nicely described, and they all need a lot of moisturizing cream. So what we suggest to them is, so when you take up lymphedema, I think you need to really run the process in your mind. As there was a nice question, I think Dr. Karthikeyan said, how do you approach a lady, or how do you approach a patient 40-year-old with primary lymphedema? So I think you need to run throughout in your mind what all these patients will need, right from if you see, many of them won't have, they cannot sit in your outpatient consulting room. So starting from a bed which will go really down, where they don't need to climb up and sit. So we have made that also now available in our new clinic, where they can really stand and just sit on the couch, having large size wheelchairs and even stretchers to shift. And even you may need sometimes large operation theater tables, or you need an extension. So these are some things which you need. As a lot of literature, lot of videos, all material is available online. Now coming to specific questions, I think I'll ask you first, and then I will add my comment.
Yes.
So you mentioned liposuction, but have you done more in upper limb or lower limb?
No,
what
sir.
has been your experience?
Sir, I have no experience with liposuction, sir, and I have no experience. I have no experience with liposuction. But Brorson's technique of radical liposuction is a very well described technique, and one of our patients was done liposuction elsewhere, and he came back. What we felt was, when we opened the limb for a lymph node transfer, we found that his entire venous system was like superficial venous system was quite badly scarred. So I don't know whether if it helps in the short term, but our patients with quite advanced lymphedema, especially lower limb edema, I don't think there is a very major role for it, sir. But early upper limb lymphedema, I feel there might be a role, but my experience is very limited with it, sir.
Yes, so as you said, Dr. Brorson is the pioneer in the world, and he has, there are a lot of videos, a lot of papers. I think all who do or are experienced in liposuction, you can go through the literature. But the 3-4 things to be kept in mind in liposuction, as Dr. Ibrahim said, you should avoid the area along the medial arm and wherever there are venous systems. Because as we know, the lymphatics follow the venous system. So if you're doing in the lower extremity, we try to avoid it along the great saphenous and the short saphenous, and in the upper extremity along the basilic vein. So these are the areas we need to avoid, and better to not to inject any fluid. So basically they do a dry liposuction. And the thing to be kept in mind is liposuction, if you do, they need to be on lifelong compression stockings, starting with on-table compression, because once you do a liposuction, and we have had that experience, that it starts oozing from your the incision sites, and it just keeps pouring. The lymph keeps on pouring. So you need to have a real good compression, starting with on-table, and try not to be very aggressive, because if you do liposuction, you may be taking out a lot of fat and a lot of fluid. But then be careful. And always before doing a liposuction, it is preferable to do an MR lymphangiogram or an MRI, basically an MRI. So in MRI, you can clearly identify the fat plane versus the fluid plane. If there is more fluid, basically you need to go for the lymphomodulation surgery like LV or lymph node transfer. Or when there is more fat, you go for fat liposuction. Now coming to the specific question, when you see a 40-year-old lady with large lymphedema lower extremity, how will you proceed? So 1, 2, 3, 4, like what are the investigations you will do, and what will be your, based on the investigation, general plan. So you can answer that.
So this is a patient with an advanced severe disease, severe lymphedema.
Yes, moderate to severe, maybe grade 3.
Okay, sir.
Grade 2, grade 3.
Sir, the first and foremost will be patient counseling, sir. So let us say she is a secondary lymphedema patient after cancer surgery. These patients are quite badly scarred in terms of psychologically, and because they're cancer survivors, and then they have a debilitating disease. So these are quite frail psychologically, these patients. So we talk to them, we counsel them, we make them accept the diagnosis first. And in terms of medical management, we teach them meticulous skin care, sir, especially caring for skin, especially the crevices, keeping the crevices dry. So we teach them how to inspect the leg for minor trauma. We tell them to open up the skin folds and look for dust particles in the crevices. We advise them to dust the crevices with a dusting powder, usually candid powder or regular talcum powder, but they should not use too much of powder so that the powder keeps accumulating there. And then the web spaces are looked for intertrigo and treated. Then patients are introduced, or then they're introduced to MLD and complex decongestive therapy, sir. So we counsel the family also. We tell them that the patient alone cannot treat herself. So she needs an MLD therapist for life. Whether they operate or not, she needs an MLD therapist for life. So we advise them 1 week of intensive in-hospital manual lymphatic drainage and complex decongestive therapy. We admit them. What we do is like the economic package is usually a problem. We work out so that they are all charged as general ward patients, even if they take up a single room. And then our MLD therapist starts the MLD complex, the compression bandaging. The leg elevation is taught. We have a very specific method of leg elevation in which the pillows are kept under the mattresses, not on top of the mattress. But usually the leg rolls off the pillow and then the leg elevation is not very efficient. So we use 2 pillows, one longitudinally and one transversely, placed under the mattress so that the elevation is consistent. So we teach them these things. We tell them how to take care of the leg. We start complex decongestive therapy for 1 week. We teach them how to go about it. So prior to complex decongestive therapy, if the patient is very hesitant about accepting the diagnosis of a lymphedema, we offer them lymphoscintigraphy. We tell them that this is a study which will prove that because some of these patients, they have very difficult time accepting they have lymphedema because of the societal social issues that is attached to filariasis, elephantiasis. So we offer them lymphoscintigraphy if the patient requires an objective diagnosis, or else we don't go for any test at this point of time. Then we start them in complex decongestive therapy. Then we discharge the patient. Then we monitor their progress every couple of weeks or even more frequently, and we see whether they're able to continue the momentum at home of doing the compression and doing the manual lymphatic drainage at home. Once these patients come back with a reasonably good quality skin, then we offer them surgery in terms of vascularized lymph node transfer, or if it's a very badly compromised limb with lot of lobulated masses or varicose lesions, we offer them debulking surgery prior. And if we do the debulking surgery prior, then once the skin becomes better or once the leg is more manageable, we offer them vascularized lymph node transfer. But we tell them, irrespective of the operative treatment, he or she will always require complex decongestive therapy as a lifelong measure. There is no 2 ways about it. She cannot be compression free or without massage at any point of her life, irrespective of undergoing surgery. But we tell them, then the question is, why do you want to operate, doctor? That is usually the question they ask. But we tell them, as the lymphedema progresses, the lymphoria is going to worsen, the foul smell is going to worsen, you are going to ulcerate. MLD and complex decongestive therapy will put a stop to all that, will prevent the progression of lymphedema. So we tell them this, we counsel them, and then if they are suitable candidates, we plan for surgery.
Yeah, very good answer. I think very comprehensive answer. Just a couple of things. Many of the patients actually are so fat or they cannot bend down and see their feet. So one good thing what you can suggest or for the trainees and fellows is have a mirror with a torch. So now many of the old people, they read a reading glass, which has got a built-in mirror. So for seeing the foot. And also, as you said, before the intertrigo and the infection gets under control, they are not candidates for surgery. Now coming to, you showed debulking, very nice results. How do you tackle debulking of the toes and the foot? Do you shave them and leave them alone, or you close it?
If it is only verrucous lesions, I do shave excisions alone, sir. Right. And regarding the dorsum of the toes, I mostly, if it is a single bulbous mass, I elevate it as either a lateral or a medially based flap, debulk it and reposition it, sir. But if it is multiple bulbous masses, I do a shave excision and leave it like that, and usually heals in 2 to 3 weeks without much of scarring, sir.
Right. Then the question is, do you ever put skin grafts? So I don't think you showed you don't put skin graft, but the question is, if you put skin graft, whether it will also become, yeah, definitely. If you put skin graft, it will also become. When do you start compression after VLND? That is another question. So coming to VLND, 3 specific questions. How do you insert? Do you suture them primarily? We saw you had primarily closed it. Or do you leave it open? Because many times we find edema comes, so we don't close it. And so when do you insert, suturing, and when do you start compression after?
Sir, thank you for the question, sir. The first part, regarding the inset part, 2 of our patients, we were able to suture it primarily, sir. In those patients are very quite badly scarred legs, lower limbs, in which we did quite extensive debulking of the flaps on either side of the lymph node, which created quite a lot of space for the lymph node flap to sit. The other case, being an upper limb case, we could not suture it primarily. And there are 2 techniques Professor Humsi Chen and Minghui Chen of Taiwan, they describe leaving sutures, placing sutures on either side of the flap and the native skin, but leaving it untied and progressively tightening them after the first week, allowing primary closure as a delayed primary closure. Yeah. And what I've done for my patient was, I felt very uncomfortable leaving a raw area just because the anastomosis was quite under the flap, and I was quite uncomfortable leaving it as a raw area. I've taken a small skin graft and placed it on the raw area, sir. And one of our patients, which I have not mentioned in the study, had venous compromise. That was a patient who had liposuction earlier. So we re-explored on the 4th day, and we didn't suture the flap at that point of time. And we do the secondary suturing after 8 days after this thing. So closure, especially in upper limb, is a problem, but that can be managed by secondary suturing. Or if worried, I was worried, so I put a skin graft. But I don't think a skin graft is needed. Secondary suturing can be used to manage this problem, sir.
I think correct. What you said is right. We also prefer putting skin grafts, and even the stay sutures. In the last case which we did, we put long stay sutures like Hanki Chen described it, but we found the stay suture was also compressing on the flap. So finally we had to remove everything. I think better is if you suspect, because what happens is most of these artery is very good, but the vein per se does not drain your whole entire flap. Yes. So the vein becomes bulged, and the vein is basically like a free vein in many of the lymph node flaps. So now that they are suggesting is you do a in continuity venous repair, that means you allow some vein to go to the other side also. So, and most of the LVA vascular lymph node transfer now is recommended is you do the artery first and see for the vein how it dilates, and then you can orient the vein accordingly and do it. Yes. So that is very good. Any experience with omental flap? So you didn't, I think you didn't mention. So we have done a few omental flaps, and basically in children. In adult and in post malignancy, you can't do anyway because their basic problem itself is doing surgery in the abdomen. And it is also very difficult to convince ladies for opening the abdomen or even laparoscopy. Somehow they are not comfortable. Children are very comfortable, but the drawback we found that when you do laparoscopic harvest, the handling of the omentum is quite a lot. So they keep on holding the omentum and keep on squeezing it. So better is I discussed with the experts, and they said put a small incision, a longitudinal vertical incision midline, and better to take the omentum out and then dissect it and then put it inside. What you need, you take it out. That way you are more atraumatic. But it's a great flap to do. The only sort of the question which we ask experts is that which flap is better. The idea is that whichever flap is in the line of lymphatic flow. So they have found the omentum is one of the best because the flow is from the sort of lateral to the medial towards the pedicle. So it draws more blood or lymphatic flow from the distal part. Now the question is, what do you do with recurrences? So if you have done, I think the question is related to, I don't know, recurrence means edema or again after you have done a debulking. So what do you do? You again
so
go ahead.
We have done a lymph node flap after debulking, so that we have done. But when we do the debulking itself, if the debulking is done by us, we avoid the anterior aspect of the leg because we want to preserve the anterior aspect of the leg for a future lymph node flap. So we restrict our debulking to only the posterior aspects. And we also preserve the perforators so that the flaps are much more robust and we hardly have skin necrosis when we preserve the perforators. But I have not done a patient who has underwent a debulking of the anterior aspect or medial aspect on which I have done a flap. But I have done, as I have said earlier, a post liposuction patient, I have done a lymph node flap. We had a venous problem. Patient that we anastomosed to the great saphenous vein, which looked apparently all right. But on third day, developed venous congestion. We took it for re-exploration and we revised the venous anastomosis to the vena comitantous of the anterior tibial vein, and the flap worked well. So that is my one experience with recurrences. But in terms of recurrent edema, I would say any and all of these patients, even they don't do complex decongestive therapy, they will come back with recurrences. Right. So unless and until...
Yeah. So I think the issue, everybody also needs to understand that you can reduce the size of limb by only comprehensive decongestive therapy. So actually, volume reduction is not it is important, but it is not the key issue for which we are doing the surgery. The surgery basically we are doing is to prevent recurrences of lymphangitis, infection, and quality of skin. And also you will find that the more they get recurrence, that is more they get lymphangitis, more edema comes and more lymphatic and more swelling comes. And it is a recurrent process. We have lost one patient. He was morbidly obese and because of infection. So we have done the procedure. 1 year later, we just called him for inquiring, and the family members said that he had severe fever and then they died. So infection and lymphangitis is the main problem for which vascularized lymph node and LVAs and all work. Now, just to add with your Penidur antibiotic, so now Pendit is available, which is penicillin G oral, 400 and 800, so 4 lakh and 8 lakhs. So you can give it for an extended period of time. And one of the recommended things now is that if you have a skin lesion, that means if you have varicose lesions and if you have a lot of, they always will scratch. So whenever they scratch, they will definitely get infected because it's a good bed for with a good proteinaceous fluid. So in those cases, you can continue them for a very long time, even 3 months, 6 months, you can continue. Now coming to another question is scrotal filariasis. What has been your experience? Do you think?
I've not done any case myself, sir, but in my training, the protocol for scrotal filariasis in Tanjavur is bilateral nodovenous shunt.
Right.
And so,
yes. So that is that's a good this thing. And most of the time, the nodovenous shunt is supplemented by radical. We have done a couple of cases. We also did nodovenous, followed by debulking of the scrotal skin. You can actually remove entire skin and leave the midline raphe and very little scrotal existing, like what you showed for the creases. You just keep the crevice. That skin alone you maintain. In case of scrotum, you keep the midline raphe and then you can remove all the skin, and it maintains for a long time. Dr. Koshima has done lymph node transfer also, and they have done a pedicled omental transfer also to bring it around the scrotum. So those are the things has been done. Now the question is, how do you train for MLD or CDT? Do you send specifically?
No, sir. What happened was, like when I was doing my fellowship, we had one surgeon who used to operate on lymphedema often. Being an orthopedic surgeon, he is an avid microsurgeon, and because of that, he took up lymphedema surgery, and they had an MLD unit. So Japanese, they don't work on Saturdays and Sundays. So I used to spend all my time at the MLD clinic, learning the MLD from the therapists. And now I train all my therapists to do the MLD part and the bandaging part, sir.
So anybody wants to be trained, you please send them to Dr. Ibrahim. And of course, the other thing is we sent our personnel to Amrita. Amrita has got a very good MLD clinic, and the nurses, I have seen them, the way they do it, they really spend a lot of time and effort. So if they have a 1 week program, I think somebody's mic is on, please. So just mute yourself. And so you can send them to Amrita Institute also. They run a weekly course. And earlier it was a certified, I'm not sure it is certified course or not, but they are because they have a very good flow of patients who come continue regular basis. Now the question is pneumatic compressive devices. What is your experience, and do you recommend them? And so you answered, then I'll answer.
I don't recommend them at all, sir. I believe there are two types of pneumatic compression devices in the market. One is a monolocular device, and another is a multilocular device.
Yes.
The multilocular device is marketed as a sequential compression device. Correct. And these devices, the amount of compression that they impart on the lymphatics is quite high. And the monocular device is quite I would say harmful to the surviving lymphatics, and there are enough studies and international literature says that prolonged severe compression damages these lymphatics. So I myself in my practice never use pumps, sir. Never I use pumps, but there are patients who they feel they cannot do complex decongestive therapy at home, and they bought a pump. Like it costs around 1.5 lakhs, I suppose, and they have bought a pump. They have a pump at home. Then my hands are tied. I allow them to use the pump, but I allow them to use it sparingly. But I don't think it helps that much, sir. The MLD is a very nuanced massage that first empties the proximal lymphosomes and then manipulates the pooled lymph in the distal lymphosomes into the empty proximal healthy lymphosomes. So I think there is a very scientific way of doing MLD. I don't think the pumps blindly by sequential compression will give a similar compression to the patient, sir. I wouldn't suggest them, or I wouldn't recommend using them.
So this is a very hot topic in every session. I also ask the same question, and we do give pumps because as you said, many people don't have access to somebody who will do it. So something is better than nothing, number one. But MLD, as you said, is definitely far superior to any pump. What you meant basically loculated is basically multi-chamber.
Yes.
So if you set this, it is just like a VAC device. So if you have VAC is very useful. We know the use of VAC. But if you have a vascular compromise or you are a diabetic patient, you reduce the volume of the VAC. You reduce the pressure. You keep it at 75 to 100. Similarly, you can adjust the chamber. So if the patient is having, if you feel that there are some existing lymphatic present, you can reduce the what do you call as the squeeze pressure, you can reduce it. Multi-chamber is available, and if you want the whole body, so now people recommend a whole body chamber. It is a whole body suit, so you sit there, and as you said, MLD normally starts with the unaffected side from the opposite limb, so the upper extremity. So if you have a lower extremity, they start from the upper extremity. Basic idea is to remove everything from the non-affected side and then sort of create a negative pressure. So it is to be viewed in a manner in which if they don't have access, there are a lot of old people who don't have access, and there are many patients, there are many forums which I have been attending also, that they suggest that they come back from office or work and they just put their hand in the machine and they feel nice. But yes, if you have done any micro, or if you're intending to do any surgery, then they are not the candidate. But those who are not intending to do anything in future, and they don't have access, then it can be done with care and a good machine. Nowadays, the machines are available around 50 to 60,000. The next question is, are we shifting towards flaps like TDAP or SCIP with subdermal lymphatics with or without the need for lymph node transfer? So yeah, so this is basically the work from the Taiwan and also from US. So what they feel that they, like you said, you mentioned in your beginning of your talk, the first time when people noticed reduction in lymphedema was when they did a groin flap for the hand.
Yes.
And if you find even Professor Gillies in 1930 article is he had done a big abdominal flap for a lymphedema in the hand post-traumatic. So this is a new trend, but definitely if you take skip with too much of lymphatic, it is causing more donor site morbidity. So they are all doing it for grade 1, where there is very less lymphedema, and then you just put the skin paddle. The same group which says you don't take skin paddle because it is aesthetically unappealing, but the same group also presents the skip flap, which is also a skin flap sitting right on your wrist. So it is very difficult to justify. But yes, we have our experience of doing TDAP flap and a lat dorsi. That means you don't take muscle, basically you take the perforator and the lymph node. The advantage is very good in post-traumatic. So if you have a depressed scar in which you want to cover the scar and you want to bring basically connecting the proximal and distal lymphatics, in this case you are only bridging the gap. There is no lymphedema problem basically distally because of circumferential skin loss or circumferential trauma. You have a edema in the distal part. There these are suggested. The next question is chylous ascites. I think Japan only they have more experience. I have no experience, and we have also talked to our pediatric. Now they also see it very less because they say most of the children don't survive. In Japan, because they survive and they are able to maintain in intensive care, they do it. MLT, does it work in post-cancer? I think you mentioned, yes, it does work in post-cancer. And for a patient with, same question. Have you or do you recommend primary lymphedema, primary lymphatic surgery when you do mastectomy? So you mentioned it, but what are your thoughts on it?
So I think prophylactic lymphovenous anastomosis is the way forward because prevention is any day better than cure. So the logic of the surgery presents itself, sir. So it is because certain subset of cancer patients, like patients with pelvic lymph node dissection and pelvic irradiation, they are some of the patients who highest incidence of bilateral lymphedema, which has got the greatest morbidity. So adding another couple of hours of operating time and performing lymphovenous anastomosis in a virgin leg with virgin lymphatics appears very attractive. But the cost benefit analysis and to assess what kind of impact it has or does it really prevent lymphedema is something that should be studied, sir. Yeah. So this is, I think,
it is a very debatable topic because what happens is when you start doing more and more lymphedema, and then you start getting more and more because you're only doing lymphedema, and then you are more excited to try to do this. But if you see the incidence of lymphedema in post mastectomy also, it can vary between 30 to 70% in various studies. But then if you are doing it primarily, you're not knowing whether the patient will really need it or not. And most of the time, lymphedema only presents 3 to 4 years after the mastectomy. It is not immediate when they put on weight, when they have other factors. There are a lot of psychological factors and compression problems. So those are the times when they start getting lymphedema. So if you try to do them primarily, you are maybe sometime doing an overkill because you are doing something which is the patient may not need. So I feel that when we are starting in our practice, when you have so much of secondary problem, first let us do the secondary things. And then when the demand comes, we will go for primary. So that's been our thought. And because in primary, you really don't know whether your thing is working or whether it didn't develop at all. So it is very difficult to tell either way. So there is one question on diet. I think I cannot overemphasize on diet. And we just recently got a renal transplant and renal patient diet for our patients because most of them need salt restricted diet, and salt restricted need not be like tasteless. So you need to really concentrate on the diet of our patients. They will all tell, I don't eat at all, doctor, still I put on weight. I think it is true for us also. So the reason is basically they just cannot diet. So one of the things I feel that most of the patients who have BMI or high BMI, they should undergo a bariatric procedure if it is accessible and if they can afford it, because that will really make their life much better. I think we are nearly finished all our questions. Only question again was liposuction with lymph node or LVA. So I think we won't do together. If you want to do it, you do the distal part, micro part first, and don't do on the proximal side. Anyway, most of our LVAs and lymph node transfer are distal around the ankle and the wrist. So you can always do the liposuction higher up in the medial arm, the thigh, and the calf region. And Dr. Karthikeyan, are you there?
Dr. Sridhar has raised his hand. I think he's got a point to say.
No, I just want to tell, it's a very nice way in you have started this, Karthikeyan. I think it's a good thing to have this middle level people to come out and then present their cases. That's an excellent way you have started being. Now, 2 points on this lymphedema I just wanted to tell is, we are back again in the cycle. We started our practice with, again, Pentiz 400 and Pentiz 800. Now we are back again to Pentiz 400, Pentiz 800.
Yes,
we were looking for lower limb lymphedema, momentum as a pedicle, tuck it into the groin. And now again started doing this. In 80s, Chittale presented tensor fascial at a flap as an intervening flap for lymphedema of the lower limb, which we have been doing for quite a lot of time without having a proper explanation how it works. Now I think we are back again on it, that intervening flap, but with an explanation how it works. I think these are the 3 things. I think the cycle is back again on momentum and intervening flap insert, and also Pentiz back again.
Yes,
I just want to tell that. That's the only thing. Since I have gone now 4 decades now I have finished. What I did it in the first decade, now it is my associates are doing it in the 4th decade in a different way.
Yes, sir. The first publication of Koshima comes also way back in 1990. And when I asked Professor Koshima how he got interested in this field, he said he heard Professor O'Brien speak. And in the end, O'Brien became so emotional and started crying and said, this is a field which is burning. I beg all plastic surgeons to kindly take up this specialty. And that was his closing remark, and he was in tears. And that's what stimulated Professor Koshima to take up the specialty. And then also Dr. Hangji Chen was at that time a trainee with Dr. O'Brien. I think everything comes a circle. Only thing is we have got better modalities to visualize it now. And scientifically, again, prove what was, it's just like hand washing, which comes back after 30 years. Now we know scientifically it is why it works and how it works.
Nice.
Any? So there are various models of camera also. Some people ask me in my in my cell phone, what are the other options if you don't have your expensive Pentero microscope and the flow optics. Flow optics cost around roughly 1.5 lakhs and Pentero costs 1.8 crores. So these two are very expensive toys to have. But there are a lot of like Japanese modification. There are various cameras are there. And Indian camera is available now for around 12 lakhs. So that people in Bangalore, they are using it both in Sakra Hospital and in Manipal Hospital. So they are using a lower end camera, which is also quite effective. I think we need to talk in more and more forums, especially pediatric forum, oncosurgeons, gynecologists, because as Dr. Govardhani also mentioned, they are the most referring specialty which refers us most. The only difference in Indian patients and Japan, and both I have also visited many centers, is that our patient all wear sari, so everything gets hidden in sari, whereas they all wear trousers and shoes. So they need to. That's why in Japan, once the shoe doesn't fit, immediately they go for insurance, and then they get under insurance because their pant doesn't fit and their socks and their shoes get tight. So they go in stage 1, stage 2, lymphedema itself, they get operated. In fact, most of the patient I saw Professor Koshima operate, but for the reports, I was very confused which side he's going to operate because both legs look same, especially after MLD.